Film Club.
Thank you for joining us for an episode of Film Club. I'm one of your hosts, Andy Harrison. With me, as always, it's Andy Donaldson.
Now then, you just caught me mid-slurp. Sorry.
What were you slurping?
Tea.
This week, we're taking a look at one of Andy's favourites with American History X.
American History X tells a tale of a brother. He's white power. He's been indoctrinated by this regime, and part of that is through his older brother, who is heavily neo-Nazi. He's in prison, and the reason he's in prison is because he manslaughter. He killed a few people that tried to rob his car, and did it in a very violent way. Now his brother comes back from prison, a changed person, looking to rewrite his wrongs and looking to move forward and leave that life behind because he had an epiphany in prison. I will have to say something. With the recent things that have gone on in America and the election, this was not intentional. I do apologise. Maybe not the best timing to do this film. And so I decided to revisit this. It's been a while since I watched it, and as always, it's hard hitting. It's bloody well hard hitting.
So you've talked about American History X for a couple of years, really, and it's always sort of come up in the conversation of your top 10 sort of best films. And there was a bit of me that watching this that definitely wish we'd done this after This Is England, because thematically they hold so much value. You can see sort of like that. There's a sort of a strange scene in this film where he gets offended by him being called KKK, not because of their beliefs, but more so about how they organise themselves. And but then put that up alongside the British white nationalists that we were talking about when we did This Is England just 2 weeks ago. And it was quite funny coming across those two themes at the same time. Now, I have some questions for you. So I want you to paint the picture for me. When did you first see this?
I was a kid, Andy. I was about 14, 15. A good friend of mine called Paul. I mentioned him a couple of episodes back, or last episode. Paul set me down. He had this amazing collection. He was like, Andy, come on, we need to educate you on good films, like revolutionary films that you need to see at least once.
I'm just curious because I think for films that end up in the top 10 for anybody, they generally have some sort of like, I don't know, personal connection, or there's something deeper than just, basic film analysis that goes to it. When you first watched it, for example, was it like a profound moment then, or was it something that you grew to appreciate over the years?
Last week's episode, you were on about Dead Man's Shoes, and you said you just so used to watching, and I guess it was the same for me, you're so used to watching films that were just kind of generic and just like Hollywood. I don't know, I feel like with this, there was no hero, and there is no hero, and despite however much it tries to portray, I don't even know his name, Edward Norton, Derek, sorry, when he comes out of prison, despite how much he tries to portray him as being, a better person, he's still not a hero. And I quite like the idea that you're watching this guy who's truly passionate about his beliefs, but you as an individual, like a ethical individual, know that he's wrong. And it's quite fascinating. It's a fantastic scene that we watched was when they sat at the dinner table and having an argument, a conversation. It goes from Republicans and liberals, and it goes to clear racism, and it's the fact that the mother's trying to stop the conversation. It's the fact that the sister's like, oh, you don't know what you're on about. And then the mother goes away and says, the conversation's over, and her partner at the time, who's the teacher at the school, he's like, we're having a conversation, we're having a debate, and it's that intellectual debate that they have. When I first watched it, and obviously, they have that ending scene. The ending scene is always the thing that stuck with me, and it's what Paul, my mate, was waiting for, thinking, fucking hell, mate, this is like true film. This is the stuff that'll hit you hard.
And it's quite interesting because I was just reading that David McKenna, the guy who wrote the script, he apparently based a lot of this stuff on some of the bigotry and some of the racism, some of the fear-mongering that was like present in his own life when he was growing up. And now I don't know how much of that is verbatim. I don't know how much he actually took, word for word. I don't know how much of the acts he necessarily saw, so much as the feelings and the thoughts. But you can tell that some of this is coming from an honest place. Again, that's not necessarily a correct place. It's certainly not. But, it's coming from an honest place.
I'm not going to lie, Andy. It made me think, why the fuck is this in my top 10? And that's not it's not that it's a bad film. I mean, the performances, the cinematography and everything I love about it, but I struggle to watch this time round with the amount of profanity. I don't like that kind of language.
I think the obvious one that we need to talk about, really, if we're going to talk about American History X, It's Ed Norton, right?
Because he's superb, Andy. He's superb, and he's one of the standout things in this film. He's fucking superb.
It's this sort of transformative experience when you go from like Ed Norton, who is, I guess, meek and a little bit timid in something like Fight Club, and then you get him here where he's got this obviously this physical performance. I think half this film is basically like ogling Ed Norton's like body. It's like the camera is obsessed with showing him shirtless constantly. And obviously that's partly show off the tattoo, and then he's got this quite impressive sort of like imposing stature, and he's got this imposing physicality to him. But then
his presence is very, very imposing.
Yeah, but what I really like about him is that's really softened when he comes out of prison. Like even contained in the same film. Yeah, so he kind of obviously he's got that aggressive swagger about him before he's committed that horrific act, which by the way, that scene is brutal to watch. It really is quite brutal. Side
note, every time I watched it since the first time I always had to look away, and I made myself watch it this time, and oh god. It's horrible. It's Andy. It's fucking rough.
Thankfully, they do the sort of the psycho thing of never really showing it. But
it's the sound. It's the sound of the teeth on the curb.
It's horrible. But then, when he comes out of prison later on, he's sort of like his body is much more closed up. He's they dress him in baggier clothes. They sort of obviously they give him the hair back.
Long sleeve t-shirt to hide all his tattoos.
Yep, exactly. I love, by the way, when he's wearing the shirt, he's wearing a vest underneath to make sure that the tattoos don't come through. Mm-hmm. Like really lovely touches like that. Like I could have gone for a bit more of the transition.
I love the build up of his chemistry with him and his the guy does his in the cart he does the washing with, and he goes "aight," and they have at the start it's quite he's not talking, then they have banter, and then they talk, and then towards the end he's like, "Oh no, you helped me out" and everything like that. And then to contrast that, you're on about his relationships. When the doctor comes to hospital, the principal, Avery Brooks, he was superb as well. I know he's a quite small role. So what did you think of the end scene?
I'm not a big fan of it, to be honest. Like I don't.
Oh, really? Interesting.
For me, the end scene doesn't quite fit properly. What I do really like, I love the suggestion that the kid who kills Danny at the end. I love the suggestion that there's another side to this story, and that Danny is the one who has been brainwashed by this horrible white group of people who are extremists. And then the flip side of that isn't that all black people are therefore innocent. Instead, that lad at the end sort of suggests that there is the exact same thing happening, but with some black people who are extremists, and that
they're both being indoctrinated.
Exactly, he's like this mirror image of Danny, and there's an alternative film to be told from his perspective. I'm not a huge fan of the way they set up the sort of the last bit of tension in the film, and strangely enough, although we've just been praising Ed Norton's performance, I don't really like his performance in that very last scene where he's holding on to Danny. But minor issues really.
What did you think of the film as a whole?
There's a bit of me that wishes, if I'm honest, right, there's a bit of me that really, really wishes we had watched this months, if not a year or so away from This Is England, because thematically,
you can't help but compare.
Yeah, it's so similar to This Is England, but whereas This Is England rings sort of grounded and realistic and true, this is much more turned up. And I love the ideas and the messaging in this. In particular, by the way, one thing we haven't really mentioned so much, the idea of fatherhood and the idea of absent fathers.
Yeah.
And even fathers having a certain sway over people and their development, and how dangerous that can be sometimes. But for me, the film never quite becomes a cohesive whole. It never quite gets to the heights that I think the premise and some of the ideas they start talking about promise.
No, that's absolutely fair. I mean, I had a realization on rewatch, so.
But for you, because this is still an important film for you, I want to hear a couple of moments that stand out. Give me some of your favourites.
That dinner room scene where they're having the conversation, it's the intellectual conversation is back and forth. I think the basketball scene's a great moment. What's interesting more is, again, on the rewatch, is the fact that they did get along together. They were fine. There was a couple of chirps back and forth, but it was only like when they started, Derek being the leader, he's the one that said, it's now or never, it's binary, it's yes or no, you either, this is your court or this is ours. There are a couple of scenes that stand out to me, and obviously the last monologue where Danny's, his essay at the end, and he's like, my older brother Derek said, try and, if you can't say something, try and take it from someone else because probably said it better. And it's Abraham Lincoln's inauguration speech. So I always find that a little bit touching.
Final question. Does this still scrape the top 10, top 15? Is it in there? Is it up there?
As I said, it's what was previously before was a shortlist. I always put it there because of how important it is in terms of a film that I think everyone should watch. It doesn't fit in the top 10, nor top 15, I would say, because I've seen more films over the time. When I originally decided that was top 10, I do think it's a film that everyone should see.
So there is American History X. You can let us know in the comments below what you thought of American History X, and please do so, because I'm betting Andy will be fascinated to read them this week. But we will be back once again next week, where we're going to take a look at Sorry to Bother You.
Sorry to bother you. Interesting.
A very recent film, but I'm excited to watch it nonetheless. So until then, get watching.
Cheers.